we're seeing reports that a deal to rescue the First Republic Bank is imminent. U.S. regulators have reportedly asked 6 banks to bid for the embattled lender. Shares in First Republic plunged last week, you might recall, after it admitted that customers had withdrawn $100 billion in deposits in March. Now, at that time, its competitor Silicon Valley Bank had collapsed, prompting fears of a wider banking crisis. SVB's failure was swiftly followed by the demise of another U.S. lender, Signature Bank. Well, for more on this and whether a takeover of First Republic could put an end to the crisis in the banking sector, we can speak with the chairman of Great Hill Capital, Thomas Hayes, who joins me now from New York. Great to get you on the program, Thomas. So in the first instance, what do you make of these latest developments?
Well, we're going to see what happens tonight. Either they're going to get a deal done. I know Citizens and JP Morgan and PNC were invited to bid. USB and Bank of America declined the opportunity to bid. The odds are on a receivership and then a bid for the assets. If they do a deal, it will be at a very small level. They've lost $22 billion of market cap. But I think to your earlier point, Karishma, when you see one bank fail, like Silicon Valley Bank, then you could say, well, it was management. They didn't hedge out their interest rate risk. But then you saw Signature Bank, you saw Silvergate Capital. Now you're seeing First Republic. And it all points to one common denominator. And the Fed has moved too aggressively, too quickly, the steepest hiking cycle in 40 years, and things are starting to break. So they're going to have to ease off. And this comes at the perfect time, considering that we have the Fed meeting on Wednesday.
So, when you make that point, of course, the fact that you are seeing this spillover, right, Thomas, in the wider banking sector, how concerned are you about the health of other U.S. banks against this backdrop?
Well, you have 46% of deposits in the United States that are still uninsured. And the thing that would seal this up right away is if the executive branch, which has the ability to do so in times of emergency, would step in and say, we're going to do a temporary backstop on all deposits for the next 24 months until Congress can get together and increase the FDIC insurance, maybe from $250,000 to $500,000. That would probably quell some of the problems. The banks in general, certainly the larger banks, are very well capitalized. This is nothing like 2008, so there's no worries on that front. However, Chair Powell has referenced his affinity for Paul Volcker many times, and he wants to break the back of inflation like his hero. The problem is if you look at the history of what Volcker actually did, is Volcker stopped hiking rates and even started cutting rates in 1982 while inflation was still above 6%. So why did Volcker do that with inflation still so high? Is because he understood the lagged effect of an aggressive tightening policy that he did in previous months. And Powell really needs to come to that conclusion, even though inflation hasn't met his targets, that he can pause, assess the data over the next few months. If he needs to go back to hiking, he can do so. But I think when you're seeing things start to break, it's time to pause. If he were to pause, I think you'd see a big settling in the banking system.
I just want to jump in there, and not that I'm trying to defend Chair Powell or anything, but can we blame all of this on higher interest rates, Thomas? Isn't this also down to the fact that regulation isn't as tight as it could be in the United States, and that's been an issue for the banking sector as well?
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't blame it on the loosening of policy that you saw in recent years. That was not impactful as it relates to these four. Now, was the supervision a little bit lax in San Francisco? Yes. Was it a little bit lax in Signature Bank? Yes. But there were warning signs. This is a symptom of the steepest hiking cycle within the last 40 years. And you just can't. The problem is you got all these deposits from all of the stimulus during the pandemic. You got them all at once at the exact worst time to reinvest them when rates were effectively zero. And these banks did not do any cowboy type of investments. They weren't reaching for crazy thing. If you look at Silicon Valley Bank, they had 5.7-year duration in US treasuries. So they forced all these deposits through the stimulus checks into the banks. The banks had to invest them. Maybe they could have been a slightly lower duration, but they had to make some income. So this is kind of, it's the unintended consequence of a plan to obviously get a hold of inflation. But inflation has been coming down since last July, and it's time to let it work through the system.
Thomas Hayes there, chairman of Great Hill Capital. Great to get you on the show.